The day the world stopped for me. Part I, before everything changed. The sound of my alarm was the same as it had been for the past 3 years. That tinny, cheerful melody that my phone insisted on calling morning bliss, but which, for me, had all the charm of a dripping faucet at 3 a.m. I rolled over, reached for the phone, and silenced it with a practiced swipe. My room was still cloaked in the soft pre-dawn blue, the kind of light that always made me feel suspended in time, not quite night, not yet day. Outside, the city was just beginning to stir. Somewhere down the street, the old bakery's ovens were already humming, and the faint scent of bread, warm and yeasty, drifted through my open window. It was, in every possible way, a perfectly ordinary Tuesday. I swung my legs out of bed and stepped onto the cool wooden floor, the boards creaking softly under my weight. My apartment was small but tidy, arranged with the kind of efficiency you develop when you've been living alone long enough to know exactly how much space you don't need. A coffee maker on the counter. A few photographs tacked to the fridge, my parents smiling under a lemon tree in their garden, my best friend Lena making a face at the camera during a road trip last summer. My life was fine, just fine, and maybe that was the problem. By 7:30, I was walking the same route to work that I always did, a 10-minute stroll past the newsstand, where an elderly man named Greg folded papers with a precision that made origami look sloppy, and the flower shop that always had buckets of tulips out front, no matter the season. I nodded at familiar faces, exchanged polite hellos, and moved on. Work was a mid-sized publishing house, tucked into the upper floors of a nondescript office building. My job was somewhere between editor and project coordinator, which meant my days were spent staring at screens, chasing deadlines, and smoothing over last-minute crises that were always labeled urgent, but never really were. I was good at it, efficient, reliable, and if I was being honest, I'd stopped thinking about whether I liked it a long time ago. By noon, I was eating the same salad from the same cafe, scrolling absent-mindedly through my phone while the hum of office chatter filled the air. Birthdays, deadlines, mild gossip, the soundtrack of routine. But here's the thing about life. It doesn't send you a notification when it's about to change. There's no bold font headline that reads, "Pay attention, this is the moment everything turns." And yet, that Tuesday, the headline was there. I just didn't recognize it yet. At 5:02 p.m., I was packing up my bag, sliding my laptop into its case. Rain had started outside, a gentle drizzle tapping against the window panes. I considered waiting it out but decided against it. I liked the sound of rain on my umbrella. It made the city feel quieter, softer. Halfway home, I ducked into the old library. I told myself it was just to get out of the rain for a minute, but the truth was, I'd been meaning to return a book I'd borrowed weeks ago and barely opened. The library smelled the way all good libraries should, like paper, dust, and 1,000 untold stories. The overhead lights flickered faintly, their hum blending with the patter of rain on the tall windows. I wandered to the return desk, dropped the book in the slot, and turned to leave. That's when I saw it. A slim, leather-bound journal sitting alone on the reading table, its cover worn smooth from years of handling. It wasn't the kind of thing the library usually had, no catalog sticker, no barcode. Just there, waiting. I don't know why I picked it up. Maybe it was the way the leather felt warm in my hands, or the faint scent of cedar that clung to it, or maybe, and I wouldn't realize this until much later, maybe it was because it was meant for me. I opened it. And that was the first moment the world began to slow. Part II. The first page was blank. Not just bleempty in a way that felt deliberate, as though the absence of words was itself a message. The paper was thick, the kind you only find in old notebooks made before cost-cutting and mass production. I ran my fingertips over it and felt the faint texture, like the grain of wood. On the second page, there were words, handwritten in dark blue ink, the kind that bled ever so slightly into the fibers of the paper. The handwriting was neat but alive, with a slight rightward tilt that made it feel like the words were leaning toward me, eager to be read. If you found this, it's because you're ready. You may not believe that now, but keep reading. I glanced around the library. The place was almost empty. A young man at the far table had earbuds in, nodding along to music only he could hear. An older woman in the corner was flipping slowly through a photo book, lost in her own memories. Nobody was watching me. I turned the page. This journal doesn't belong to anyone, or maybe it belongs to everyone. It has a way of showing up when it's needed. I don't know how it finds the right person, only that it does. My turn with it began 2 years ago, on a day when I thought I'd lost everything. What I found instead was a reason to begin again. I paused, my heartbeat quickening for reasons I couldn't quite explain. I should have put the journal down. I should have left it on the table and walked out into the rain, gone home, made dinner, watched something forgettable until sleep came. Instead, I kept reading. The entries were written by different hands, some blocky and bold, others looping and delicate. Different inks, different styles, but all following a thread, stories of turning points. A man who walked away from a career he hated to start a vineyard in Italy. A woman who, after losing her sight, learned to sculpt and found a new way to see the world. A teenager who built a tiny shelter for stray dogs in his village and ended up creating an international rescue network. Each entry ended the same way. When it's your turn, you'll know, and when it's time, pass it on. Something in my chest tightened. The rain outside had deepened, drumming harder on the windows. The light in the library had shifted to a warm gold, the way it does just before closing time. And then, on a page halfway through, I saw something that made me stop breathing. It was my name. Not my full name, just Alina, written in the same ink as the last entry. Below it in the same looping script. Your turn is coming. You've been waiting without knowing you were waiting. Soon, the world will stop for you too. I read it again and again. I'd never seen this journal before. No one in my life knew I'd be in the library today, not even me until an hour ago. My hands felt cold, my thoughts loud. That was when the librarian's voice broke through the silence. We're closing in 10 minutes. I turned toward her, but when I looked back at the table, the journal was gone. I blinked, certain I'd left it right there. I checked under the table, flipped through the stack of returned books by the desk. Nothing. Lose something? The librarian asked. I'm not sure, I said, which was the only truthful answer I had. Outside, the rain had stopped. The streets glistened under the amber glow of the streetlights. I walked home slowly, the world around me feeling both sharper and somehow distant, as though I were moving through a dream I'd half remember later. That night, I couldn't sleep. The words kept looping in my head, your turn is coming. I didn't know what that meant. I only knew that something had shifted. And in the days that followed, that shift began to grow. Part II, the turning point. The morning after the library, the city felt different. Not visually, the same gray clouds stretched across the sky, the same buses rattled past my apartment building, the same coffee shop served the same bitter but familiar cappuccino. But underneath all that sameness, there was a hum. It wasn't a sound exactly, more like a pressure in the air, a subtle vibration I couldn't name. I caught myself looking for the journal everywhere, at the library, in second-hand bookstores, even in the lost and found at work. I didn't tell anyone about what I'd read. How could I? It would sound ridiculous. I found a magic journal and it wrote my name. Not exactly casual break-room conversation. Still, the phrase, your turn is coming, had dug its way under my skin. The first strange thing happened on Thursday. I was in the elevator, riding down from the 12th floor after a long day. Just as the doors were about to close, a hand darted in slender fingers with chipped red nail polish. A woman stepped inside, maybe mid-40s, wearing a raincoat and carrying a small paper bag. She looked at me and smiled, as if she knew me. Not long now, she said. I blinked. I'm sorry. She tilted her head. You'll see. Then the elevator doors opened on the ground floor, and she stepped out into the drizzle without another word. I stood there frozen until the doors closed again. The second thing happened on Sunday. I was at a farmer's market, wandering between stalls, when a man selling handmade candles stopped me. "You look like someone who needs this one," he said, handing me a jar labeled New Beginnings. It smelled faintly of cedar and rain. "How much?" I asked. He shook his head. "No charge, just take it." I hesitated, then accepted it, feeling a prickle at the back of my neck. That scent, it was the same as the journal. By Monday, I'd convinced myself I was imagining things. Coincidences happen. People say cryptic things all the time. And smells, well, the brain loves patterns. But then came the email. It landed in my inbox at 9:14 a.m. No subject line, no sender I recognized. Just a single sentence. "When it's time, you'll know." I stared at the screen, my hands trembling. I was sure it was connected, though I couldn't prove it. I deleted the email, emptied the trash folder, and tried to get on with my day. The turning point arrived that Friday. Work had been suffocating, 3 projects all crashing toward the same deadline, my inbox multiplying like it was breeding in the dark. By the time 6 p.m. rolled around, I was ready to collapse. I left the office, stepped into the street, and stopped. Across the road, a man was handing out flyers. Nothing unusual, except for a split second, I thought I saw the journal in his hands. The same leather cover, the same worn edges. I crossed the street before I'd even decided to move. When I reached him, the journal was gone. In its place was a single flyer, which he pressed into my hand. It wasn't advertising a product or event. It was a handwritten note. "Elena, tomorrow, 4 p.m. the old observatory." There was no signature, no explanation, just those words. I barely slept that night. I kept imagining what might be waiting for me at the observatory. The building had been closed for years, a relic from a time when the city had cared more about looking at the stars than building more high-rises. By the time 3:30 rolled around, I was already on the hill where the observatory stood, its domed roof streaked with rust, its windows boarded up. The air was crisp, the wind carrying the faint smell of rain and cedar. At exactly 4:00, the main door creaked open. A man stepped out. Early 60s, weathered face, eyes bright like he knew something I didn't. In his hands was the journal. "Glad you came," he said. This was where the world truly began to stop. Part IV, the journey. The man didn't move until I crossed the last few steps to the observatory door. Up close, I noticed his jacket was frayed at the cuffs, his hair silver but not neat, like he'd just come down from somewhere windy and wild. He held the journal the way someone might hold a fragile bird, steady but gentle. "You've seen this before," he said, not as a question but a statement. I nodded, my throat dry. "At the library, but then it disappeared," he finished for me, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "It tends to do that. It goes where it's needed." I should have asked 100 questions. Who was he? How did he know my name? Why me? But before I could, he turned and motioned for me to follow. The inside of the observatory smelled of old wood, dust, and faintly, impossibly, cedar. The walls were lined with shelves, not of books but of boxes. Hundreds of them. Some large, some small, each with a handwritten label. June 1998, Paris 2011, Rising Tides, First Flight. At the center stood an old brass telescope, aimed at the sky through a gap in the boarded windows. "This place," he said, "has been home to the journal longer than I've been alive, and I've been its keeper for the last 32 years. "Keeper?" I asked. He placed the journal on a worn table. When the journal chooses someone, it's because they're standing at a crossroads. Sometimes they know it, often they don't. But the journal, it nudges them toward the choice that will change everything. I shook my head. That sounds impossible. He gave a low chuckle. So does the fact that it wrote your name before you ever saw it. My stomach flipped. How? That's not my part to explain. The journal works in ways I don't fully understand. My job is only to deliver it when the time is right. He pushed the journal toward me. It's your turn now. I stared at it. And what am I supposed to do with it? Live, pay attention, listen, you'll know when to write. We spent the next hour talking. His name was Arthur, Though he said that when he first found the journal, he was just Art, a 21-year-old dropout with nothing but a backpack and a bad case of hopelessness. The journal had led him to build a life he never could have imagined, a life, he said, that had made him a keeper. But why me? I asked again. Arthur's gaze was steady. Because you've been waiting. I don't know for what that's for you to discover, but you wouldn't be here if you weren't ready. When I finally left, the journal felt heavier than it should have in my bag, as though it carried more than paper and ink. That night I dreamed in fragments, flashes of places I didn't recognize. A windswept coast, a crowded train station, a narrow alley lit by strings of paper lanterns. Each dream ended with the journal open on a table, a pen beside it, and my own hand hovering over the page. I woke with a racing heart and the taste of salt on my lips, as if I'd been breathing sea air. In the days that followed, small changes began to ripple through my life. A stranger on the bus handed me a folded map and whispered, "For later." An email arrived from an old college friend I hadn't spoken to in years, inviting me to visit her in Lisbon. A book I'd been wanting for months appeared on my desk at work. No note, no explanation. Each thing felt like a breadcrumb, and I started to wonder, was the journal sending me somewhere? By the end of the week, I couldn't resist. I opened it, half expecting to find it still filled with other people's handwriting. But when I flipped past the last entry, there was a fresh page. At the top, in that same looping script, were 2 words, "Begin here." And then, below it, a list. Not in ink, but in my own handwriting. I froze. I hadn't written it, but it was my handwriting. The list read, 1. Quit the job. 2. Go to the coast. 3. Find the blue door. I stared at it until my vision blurred. That was when I realized the journal wasn't just here to tell stories, it was here to write mine. First major twist. The list wasn't random. 2 years ago, before life had settled into its current quiet rut, I'd written almost the exact same list in a private notebook, a list of dreams I'd never told anyone. I'd lost that notebook in a move. The journal knew. Part V, the resolution and new meaning. The list stared back at me like a dare. 3 short lines. 3 impossible steps. I wanted to laugh at the absurdity, quit my job just like that, travel to the coast without a plan, find a blue door that could mean anything. But something inside me had already decided. Maybe it was the restless pulse I'd been feeling since the library. Maybe it was the way Arthur had looked at me, like he could already see the version of myself I didn't yet know. I handed in my resignation the following Monday. My manager looked at me with wide-eyed surprise, then something softer, almost envy. 2 days later, I packed a bag, tucked the journal inside, and boarded a train heading west. The journey was like stepping into another life. Through the windows, the city gave way to rolling fields, then low hills draped in mist. By the time I reached the coast, the air tasted of salt and the wind carried the cries of distant gulls. I walked for hours, following no map, only the tug of some invisible thread. By late afternoon, I found it. A weathered cottage stood at the edge of a cliff, its paint peeling in soft flakes. And there, set into its stone wall, was a door painted the deepest, most impossible blue I'd ever seen. I knocked. The door opened to reveal a woman in her 70s, hair silver as sea foam, eyes bright as glass marbles. She looked at me the way Arthur had, like she'd been expecting me. "You found it," she said simply. Her name was Marin. The cottage had been in her family for generations, passed from one dreamer to the next. She invited me inside, poured tea that smelled faintly of cedar, and asked me to tell her everything. When I finished, she smiled. "You think you're the first the journal has brought here. No, Alina, this place is part of its path." She reached into a drawer and pulled out a stack of old photographs, strangers standing in front of the same blue door, each holding the journal. "I was you once," she said, "and before me there were others. We're all part of the same story." That night I slept in the small guest room, the sound of waves below lulling me into a deep, strange dream. In it, I saw myself years from now, Not in an office, not chasing deadlines, but on this same coast, welcoming someone else to the blue door. When I woke, the journal was open on the table beside me. On the fresh page were 4 words: "It's your turn now." Second twist. I realized then Arthur hadn't just been the keeper of the journal. Marin had been one too. And now it wasn't just my turn to follow its path. It was my turn to carry it, to be the one who handed it to the next lost soul when the time came. The weight I'd felt in its leather cover suddenly made sense. It wasn't heavy with paper. It was heavy with every moment it had ever changed. I stayed at the cottage for 2 weeks. We walked the cliffs at sunrise, cooked over a small wood stove, read entries in the journal aloud. Some were funny, some heartbreaking, some so ordinary they were extraordinary. And slowly, something shifted in me. The restlessness that had haunted me for years eased, replaced by a quiet certainty. I was exactly where I was meant to be. When I finally left, Marin hugged me and slipped a small brass key into my hand. "For the door," she said, "in case you ever need to come home." I boarded the train with the journal in my bag, but now it felt different. Not an object I'd found, but a companion I'd been entrusted with. Months later, in a small cafe in another city, I saw a woman sitting alone, her eyes full of the same unspoken yearning I once carried. I knew then. I slid the journal onto her table without a word. She looked up in surprise, but I was already walking away. In the window's reflection, I saw her open it. And just like that, I knew the cycle had begun again. Final monologue. Some people wait their whole lives for the world to change. Others wait for themselves to change. But sometimes, the change is already on its way, quiet, steady, patient, until one day it stops you in your tracks. The day the world stopped for me wasn't the end of anything. It was the beginning of everything.